distinguished panelists, scholars from USI and NICE, participants, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the first NICE-USI annual dialogue on global and regional response to COVID-19. Nepal Institute for International Cooperation and Engagement is an independent, apolitical and non-partisan think tank which believes in freedom, democracy and a world free from conflict. We envision a world where sources of insecurity are identified and understood, conflicts are prevented or resolved, and peace is advocated. NICE has 4 major research centers: China Studies, Neighborhood Studies, Non-Traditional Security Studies, Defense and Security Studies. We also have 8 major research topics which we focus on: border and trans-boundary water politics, China's Belt and Road Initiative, China climate change and energy, disaster management, global governance, sustainable development and smart cities, Indo-Pacific affairs, international economy and development, refugee and migration. We do not need to explain that today's seminar is very timely and significant. To discuss on this very important topic, we have an excellent panel. We'd like to heartily welcome Major General B.K. Sharma, Director of USI. Thank you, sir, for your kind presence for the initiative of this seminar. Similarly, we have Major General Rajiv Narayanan. He heads Center for Strategic Studies and Stimulation at USI. I'd like to thank Major General Narayanan for helping me with the coordination of today's conference. Similarly, I'd like to welcome Major General RPS Bhadauria. He's a distinguished fellow at USI. I'd also like to welcome all the distinguished experts, scholars, and especially Dr. Roshan Khanijo, AD Research. We would also like to welcome research associate from NICE, Dr. Hoimonti, Barua, Sunil Chaudhary, and other of our scholars, and the wonderful audience who are with us today at this event. Ladies and gentlemen, this conference was supposed to take place in April in Kathmandu on a different theme. However, due to pandemic, we have to have it online here today on an issue of contemporary issues, which is COVID. We hope that through these kind of discussions and exchange, we'll be able to deal with non-traditional security threats like COVID-19, which is not only the regional but global threat at the moment. The first speaker for today would be maybe Major General B.K. Sharma. I'd like to request him to share a little bit about USI before he makes a presentation. This program is also being watched live on Facebook and YouTube. We'd like all our friends and participants to follow us and subscribe us. Thank you very much. General Sharma, maybe you can start now.
Thank you, Dr. Jaiswal, and good morning to all the audience and the panelists, and particularly thanks to our previous directors and also our council members to always encourage and inspire us. We are very fortunate to have an MOU with NICE, and under the aegis of that MOU, we are going to further deepen and broaden our cooperation, and we look forward to more such events. As you know, and it's only for the Nepalese participants, that USI is India's oldest think tank. We are into the 150 years of our celebration, and we look at the whole issues of national security strategy, military strategy, revolution and military affairs, geopolitics, and our core competencies in the USI is our Center for Historical Research, which has worldwide recognition. Then we have the oldest journal of Asia, that is USI of Journal, being published in 1874. In addition to that, we also raised and groomed UN Peacekeeping Center for about 12 years, for which credit goes to General Nambiar. And then we have the Center for Strategic Studies and Stimulation, which is headed by General Narayanan now. And I worked there for about 8 years in that center. And we are unique in the sense that we carry out net assessment studies, we carry out scenario gaming for the National Command Authority, for the premium training establishments, and we have a large number of MOUs with our foreign, colleagues maybe with, I think, nearly about 40 countries we have MOUs, and we do large number of programs under that. So with these few words, I'll now just start with today's subject, and that is, how is this post-COVID world going to be? Just yeah. So I'll come to the subject proper. And as we know that this pandemic is a black swan event or a static shock of the 21st century, and it is bound to alter global geopolitical landscape in several ways. As of last evening, we had nearly 6 million people infected all over the world, out of which nearly 350,000 people have died. And all major power centers of the world, be it United States of America, European Union, China, and India, have been very badly affected due to this pandemic. Now, the strategic pundits, they actually postulate 4 broad perspectives of alternate geopolitical futures, which range from, the decline of US and rise of China as a new hegemon. Then they say, well, both countries have proved inefficacious in providing the leadership, and therefore we are there into a confrontationist kind of a mode, and we are into a new zero-sum Cold War 2.0. But the optimists, however, prognosticate that there is an emergence of inevitable new age of global cooperation. How things pan out is very difficult to say at this stage. Leaving aside all these postulates, what is certain is that we are more deeper into a VUCA world, a world that is characterized by volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, and we need a de novo approach to understand geopolitics and the new brand of statecraft, how to navigate this VUCA world. So in my exposition today, I will just be flagging few trend lines or the drivers of this new world order. And at the top of the heap is heightened US-China rivalry. Now, it was but natural that the 2 major powers of the world should have cooperated and to help the world to tide over this crisis. But I think they are obsessed with the contestation, and we've not seen this kind of a confrontation since Tiananmen Square 1989. On the whole, the preeminent power that United States of America is, its image has got sullied in the eyes of its own countrymen and world at large. Even brand America is today losing its sheen. There is a predominant view that US with its present state of affairs is incapable of leading the world. And unless there is a more sagacious leadership which comes to the fore, then United States of America has the potential, and it has all the ingredients of comprehensive national power to assume the global role all over again. US has unleashed a number of punitive actions against China, which range from shunting Chinese media personnel out, filing lawsuits against the damage caused by coronavirus, pressing for an international inquiry, and also it has now in the process of de-recognizing Hong Kong as an autonomous province, thus depriving it of certain special trading privileges. US is also rendering, politico-military support to Taiwan and upping the ante in Tibet. It has deployed modern bombers and submarines at Guam in a forward flexible response posture, and it has also increased the frequency of freedom of navigation operations in the Western Pacific. In the ensuing rift, US, Japan, South Korea, and Australia have indicated that they would be decoupling from the China-centric manufacturing supply chain, and that is going to further, heighten the rivalry between these countries. Other countries which are smaller, the middle-level countries, they are on the horns of dilemma how to balance their interests between these two hegemonic powers. Actually, this China bashing has become a major election issue in United States of America, and therefore this China rhetoric is going to gain traction there, irrespective of who the presidential candidate is. Even Joe Biden has no other, is left with a Hobson's choice than to take a very hardened, anti-China stance. As far as China is concerned, Xi Jinping, it was imperative for him to seize this opportunity to project himself as a stronger leader and to regain some of his glory, which was somewhat bruised due to recent developments. And in an unprecedented move since the Mao era, Chinese have expelled a large number of American citizens, their journalists, and now also from Hong Kong. And they have not permitted entry of, these disease control specialists from United States of America. Very interestingly, at the 13th National Party Congress, certain unprecedented decisions have been taken, wherein again the leadership has, asserted for the primacy of the Communist Party with Xi Jinping as a core leader, and they are saying that, well, they have not only overcome the crisis, but they've emerged as the major saviors of the world, and they will help the world to reboot economy and recover global economy. They have also indicated that they will continue with their BRI projects, which is the dream and a signature initiative of Xi Jinping. Xi Jinping has also extolled PLA to be prepared for defending the sovereignty of his country in a worst case scenario, and they have embarked upon what we call as the wolf warrior diplomacy that has earned China more condemnation than any international approbation. On the security front, with the passing of Hong Kong security legislation and upping the ante on Taiwan's situation has taken a worse turn, and they're exhibiting more aggressive behavior in South China Sea, heating up the line of control with India. The underlying idea is to project Xi Jinping as a bold leader and China as a strong country capable of promoting its core interests in a post-corona world. They're also trying to hobnob with Japan, South Korea, and RCEP countries to create a new security architecture in which China will play a leading role. In a nutshell, at the present juncture, the overall impression is that both these countries are incapable of providing a global leadership to the world, but unfortunately, there is no other alternative that is on the horizon. Therefore, world is definitely plunging towards a Cold War 2.0, which will see a belligerent China and heightened strategic friendship between Uncle Sam and Dragon, with enhanced risk of a military conflict. As far as global economy is concerned, it's gone on a tailspin, and people are talking about this global recession getting into a Great Depression, what we had witnessed in 1930. WTO has said that the economic losses at the global level will range from 13 to 33%. International Labour Organization estimates a loss of about 200 million jobs globally, and US economy has taken a hit. There's the likelihood of contraction of their GDP by about 40%, and about 35 million Americans have actually applied for unemployment packages. Similar is the story of China. They have not been able to spell out any target GDP this year, and even though their exports have shown a marginal increase, but their imports remain very, very poor. and unemployment rate has soared to about 6%. Same is the case of Japanese economy, which is into a major recession. India too, similarly, which is not as strong economy as the other three, is into a recession, and we have a huge challenge of how do we manage 700 million people who are in the unorganized sector and protect their jobs and provide them social security. Likewise, states and market forces have lost confidence in China dominating manufacturing hubs, multi-country, multi-step supply chain system. They are looking for creating hedging stocks, indigenization, adopt measures to selectively decouple from global economic dependence, and this will have a major impact on FDI going towards China or any other country. The silver lining here is that these developments may offer opportunities to countries like India, Indonesia, Bangladesh, Vietnam, and to an extent even Nepal to attract foreign direct investment and create manufacturing hubs. The events have also cast a very dark shadow on the efficacy of international institutions, particularly, WHO, which was supposed to play a lead role, is at the center of controversy. United States had not only cut its funding, but put it on a tight leash of 1 month's notice to reform, or they've threatened to walk out of the WHO altogether. Same is the state with WTO and even United Nations Security, UN peacekeeping. While they were trying to cope up with other kind of humanitarian security, but humanitarian security of this nature, there is no agency in the United States which can pick up this challenge. There is, already a talk that it's a white elephant and it needs to go for major reforms, and for eventualities like what we are witnessing now, you need to create an international force which comprises doctors, nursing staff, other supporting staff to provide, equipped with skills and medicine to cope up with these kind of crises. There is also a talk that other regional organizations will probably gain more prominence, like G20, ASEAN, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and for regional integration and for some kind of a transnational assistance. But we have not seen any tangible progress in this direction so far. The events have also cast a shadow on intra and interstate socio-political strain, because the international travel, tourism, hospitality, services sector, international meets, education system, movement of people and goods, everything has been adversely affected. Consequently, we are likely to see more stringent visa regimes, border controls, and developed world would be very chary of permitting laborers or migrants coming from outside world. And the low middle country groups where there would be losses of jobs, they would be more tempted to go abroad, and that may give spur to illegal migration. And on the whole, this will create exacerbate intra and interstate socio-political tension. We see the countries which are otherwise blessed with the youth bulge will have a major problem of how to manage this youth bulge without jobs, and we are likely to witness shortage of labor. There is also a debate on models of governance, that it is seen that maybe authoritarian, quasi-authoritarian regimes fared better than the liberal democracies in controlling the thing. And European project itself, that Schengen visa and other things, it has come under a very serious challenge, and it is turning itself into fortress Europe. So the whole question about what should be the new form of governance to cope up with security challenges like this is going to be at the center of many policy debates. Also, the relations between the center and its people will get redefined. A case in point is what has happened in India, particularly with migrant laborers. And probably the population will assert for more and more rights and more protective measures and state will have to really refine its relations with the people. As far as security arena is concerned, the question will arise that are we preparing for right kind of wars, what we call is the hybrid war, new generation warfare, or is the humanitarian crisis like pandemic, climate change, actually the existential threats which require more attention. So the whole debate will be about cut in defense budgets, de novo approach to threat perception, force structuring and force development. And there will also be talks about, biological warfare and bioterrorism as the new form of warfare. These will also be at the center of policy debates. New generation technology is likely going to get more impetus, particularly R&D will be focused on pathogens, AI systems, genetic engineering, immunology, inoculation, vaccines, and prophylactic. And there would be a de novo look at how the government and different industrial complexes should do their business. The lesson that has been learned that those enterprises which are more IT savvy and dependent on IT, they have survived, and those manpower intensive organizations have taken a big hit. So there would be a de novo look at all these things. In conclusion, I would say that in the past, cataclysmic events of this nature have ushered a paradigm shift in the world order. Corona pandemic has been a natural leveler, and ipso facto is bound to bring about a paradigm shift in the geopolitical futures of the world. In my limited view, for now, what I see is a more VUCA world, which would be characterized by 3 C's, that is the cooperation, competition, and confrontation. We may witness enhanced cooperation on how to deal with non-traditional security threats and restore global economy. But the competition in terms of domination of resources, locations, and strategic influence will continue unabated, and there would be confrontation over clash of core interests and any endeavors to alternate international order in one way or the other. In some, a post-corona world will be far more challenging, and a world that would demand novel approach to make strategic assessment and craft strategic responses. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, sir. May I now request Major General Rajiv Narayanan to make his presentation?
Thank you, Dr. Jaiswal, and I would like to thank NICE for working with us. Ladies and gentlemen, my topic is essentially regional response to COVID-19. So I won't go into details of figures. The world meters on Corona gives you all the figures. The worry is that the figures are rising quite sharp. But the positive side is that our recovery rate in South Asia is high. The mortality rate is quite low as compared to the rest of the world. To give an example of India, the mortality rate is 2.86, out of which 2% is the mortality rate with comorbidity, meaning if you had any other complications before COVID. And just plain with COVID, the mortality rate is just 0.86 as of yesterday. So that is a positive factor. And especially within India, you find that there are about 6 states already where the infection rate is much lower than the recovery rate. So the active cases curve is going down, and there are other states also who are approaching this. But let us look at what has been the impact, especially economically, of this COVID in the region. Based on IMF and World Bank reports, 4 countries are facing recession out of 8 that we have. And these are Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Afghanistan, and the Maldives. Pakistan and Sri Lanka, their economy is already in a debt trap. So it's going, actually for them, it's going from bad to worse. Afghanistan, we all know what the situation is. Let's hope for the best that some peace takes place. Otherwise, the cases and the economy will go in a very deep depression. Maldives has a peculiar problem because its bulk of its GDP is dependent on tourism, which cannot take place at the moment. Now, when we look at the balance 4 countries, that is India, Bangladesh, Nepal, and Bhutan. As per the IMF and World Bank reports, if I take away the extremes of what they have given, the growth which has been given for this year is essentially between 1.9 to 3%. Doesn't look good, because while they have given these projections in the month of April, it depends on how we open up and how the industry starts functioning. So it will be too early to predict where within this zone these 4 countries are likely to be. The other aspect General Sharma had already touched upon is the growing US-China rivalry. And this region is not immune to it and will face it much more. Because when you have a new Cold War, if you go back to the old Cold War, the region which was affected was Europe. And then the other regions, which were the Middle East and North Africa, and of course Latin America. So while the Middle East, North Africa, and Latin America continue to be where it is, from Europe, the tension in the new Cold War will come into South Asia and Southeast Asia. This is the region where the tensions will come in the new Cold War. Hence, as General Sharma had mentioned, that the global and the regional economic order is unlikely to remain the same after COVID. It is changing, will change. And as we watch, in most of the countries, there is a rising call of nationalism. And some of the strategic thinkers have gone to one extreme and are looking at isolationism by the countries and not going into globalization. That would be an extreme situation. I'll touch upon it later. Looking at the region, how has been our response? Let us be very clear, the peak has not yet come. But when you look, take a granular look, what do you find? It is not as if everywhere in all regions of the country, everywhere the COVID is peaking. No. There are certain key hotspots where you are finding it a problem to control. The other areas, the situation is not that bad. That is how, when you look at it, pan South Asia, that is how it is panning out as far as the COVID spread is concerned. To know, you need to test more. You need the 4 T's, that is trace, track, test, and treat. Unless you test more, you will not know how much more is there. And the lockdown that we have essentially helps preventing the overload of the creaky health system that we have. It is creaky. And even if a city, India's New York, as many people term it, Mumbai is finding it a problem to deal with the cases that are coming up. They are running out of beds, they are running out of ventilators, this despite India themselves making ventilators. So it is going to be a problem. So when we are looking at a phased opening in areas which are not affected, as they call, people will understand this term, the green zone, the red zone, the yellow zone, how you open, how you revive the economy, the fears are also going to be of rising cases, because you will come in touch with people. So how you manage that is going to be critical. Vaccine, of course, is still NA. People are working on it. Treatment is on the fly, I would say. As you see what is happening, any patient is responding to something, the medication is being given as per that manner. So when you see this situation, and every country in the region, I would say in the whole world, is grappling with it in its own manner, isolation, to my mind, isolationism will not work. You cannot isolate yourself. However, what this pandemic has clearly shown us, that having a single source for your supplies or production materials or your trade or for resources is fraught with danger. That happened when China was making 70 to 80% of all these aspects, and they went into a lockdown. So one of the lessons learned is that you have to diversify your source. And economics tells you that regionalism will come into play. You need to create your resources and infrastructure within the region and in the neighborhood. Only then, when you have diversification of sources, you will survive, be able to better survive a future such pandemic. So, not only does a regional approach help you fight the COVID better, it will help you recover from COVID better, because you will share, if you have a good regional multilateralism going on, you will share your best practices. You will share your successes. You will learn from the experience of others where they have faced a problem and carry on forward. Now, when we look at our region, starting from scratch, India is the #2 producer of PPE and masks in the world, second to China. So India is in a position to reach out to the neighborhood, which to some extent it is already doing. I, for myself, would feel that it should reach out more. India is making its own testing kits. That is why from a few hundreds today, it is testing more than 1 lakh a day. Maybe that is resulting in the peaking of figures that you're seeing, which are rising every day. They are also in the field of making ventilators. Now, one major lesson that has come out here is, apart from regionalism, there has to be a certain degree of self-reliance amongst the countries. So this is where I feel India can reach out to the region and look at sharing the technology, joint ventures for doing all these. So as a region, you will succeed. Together, you will be able to succeed in this. So subsequently, learning from these lessons, you can take it forward and have interdependent industrial supply chains in the region. It's a win-win situation. You can sit together and work out what changes to your business rules and your tax regulations you need to do to have a win-win situation where you have interdependence within the region. And when I say within the region, South Asia, and of course, we all neighbor, a number of countries have the neighboring Southeast Asia too. So South Asia, Southeast Asia, that is how you'll be able to move forward. In the medium to long term, can we look at like what EU has, a Schengen-like openness? Immediately, it's not feasible. It will take a little while for each country to build up a strategic trust amongst each other and take it forward. But if we learn with COVID, have the interdependence and jointness in targeting COVID, that is how you can take it forward towards other fields. And for that, the last point I would make is you need to re-energize your regional architectures. I look at essentially two, BBIN and BIMSTEC. Why not SAARC, people will say? Well, the main problem we find is Pakistan. Anything Pakistan will say, India will not agree. Anything India will say, Pakistan is just not going to agree. Despite having set up the SAARC fund for COVID, I don't see much progress in that direction. Afghanistan has its own set of problems at the moment. It is not only fighting COVID, it is fighting for its peace and stability at the moment. So SAARC may not, but when you join BBIN and BIMSTEC, all the other countries of SAARC come in. You only need to add Maldives into it. And That also gives you a little bit of flavor with the Southeast Asian nations. As in BIMSTEC, you also have Myanmar and Thailand available with it. And when you join up together, each is fighting its own battles. When you join up together, combined, like for example, let us say the vaccine. India is cooperating. There are 6, I would say, laboratories in India who are cooperating with the West on working towards the vaccine. Why not use certain labs, other labs also as a joint venture together on the work on those vaccines? And you would be able to benefit from the vaccine as and when it is fielded. And the point that I'm making is, if we strengthen this BBI and BIMSTEC architecture, and if Pakistan is ready to join in, we would most wholeheartedly welcome Pakistan, but it shouldn't come with the baggage. It comes with the K baggage. It shouldn't come with the K baggage. Then you will find that things will work better, because the one statement is that the more united we stay as a region, the gain would be that you would be able to have more strategic autonomy when you deal with great powers. If you're going bilateral with the great powers individually, bilaterally when you go with a great power, let us be clear, we are on a weak wicket. But if we are together and then we look at the great powers coming in and working with us together, then we would be able to retain our strategic autonomy that much more. And as we say in maneuver warfare, the sum of the parts will always be greater than the whole. I finish here and leave it for the question answer session. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Let me welcome our third speaker for today, Major General RPS Bhadauria. Maybe we have to unmute him. Has he joined?
Yeah, he's joined. You have to unmute yourself.
He has to unmute.
Yeah, you're unmuted.
Okay, right. Thank you, Chair. And I will take off from where Jan Narayanan had left, and I would be covering how Pakistan and Afghanistan are dealing with this pandemic. Now, these are two very important countries because they have huge impact on the security situation in South Asia. Now, even prior to COVID-19, Pakistan as a nation state was facing severe challenges, be it political, social, security, or economic. COVID-19 has only exacerbated these, right? So very quickly, I will only highlight the issues because I will not be able to cover all the details. And now, how Pakistan is dealing with this pandemic? Firstly, they followed a rather risky policy of not having a lockdown. The reason given by their prime minister was that people will die of hunger if I lock down the country. Now that shows the weak capacity of the state to look after its people. The second thing is there is lack of coherence in the policy. Now, this was very evident on 22nd of March when Prime Minister Khan said that we cannot have a lockdown because of the reason that he had given, right? The very next day, within 24 hours, ISPR came out with a policy to say that they will shut down the country so that the curve on the spread of the virus is there. So see the huge difference between the Prime Minister and his own military. Also, each state has followed a different policy, like Sindh has dealt it differently than all other states. So this shows that there is no coherent policy, although they have structures for coordination, but there is no uniform policy. The third thing is, unfortunately, the kind of society that they are, the feudal society, is being seen in the way that testing is being done. Now, what I'm trying to say is that rich are buying the medical facilities. They are able to get themselves tested rather than on the medical advice, the people really who need them and who are mainly poor, right? And so far, they are able to test. The maximum that limit that they have reached is 16,500. And they have almost 65,000 cases, right? They have a good program by the name of ESAS for social security and poverty alleviation. But what is the effectiveness of this program? So far, they asked the people to register. Almost 30 million people registered there, but they have been able to distribute money only to about 10 million people so far. And we have already seen about 2 to 3 months of a pandemic. The reason is they do not have the infrastructure to distribute it. They do not have a system of direct benefit transfer the way India has. So they are doing it through the banks. The banks have opened almost about 17,000 centers, and that is where each person has to go get the money. So you can imagine the difficulty, and you can also imagine the kind of leakages that they can take place. Also, it can be targeted only towards your own followers, politically or otherwise, right? Now, besides this money which is being distributed by the government, people also need food. So we need to see what is the food security situation in Pakistan. Now, just a very few indicators. The global hunger index, Pakistan was 106 out of 119 prior to this COVID-19. 1/5 of the population undernourished. 50% of the children have stunted growth. Agriculture forms almost about 20% of the GDP, and 50% of the population is dependent on this. So this speaks about the kind of food security they are having. Now, add to this the water scarcity. They are not able to have enough water and the irrigation system to have a good agriculture crop. And this is mainly because of the poor governance. Then last year, they were hit by locust, and almost about 40% of their produce, the agriculture produce, was hit. Now, there are two very interesting factors which I wish to highlight. One is, in the past, they had given, and Pakistan, by the way, has enough arable land, not only to feed their own people, but also to export. Now, what they had done some time back was, because they could not pay back their loans to Saudi Arabia and UAE, they bartered it with some arable land. Now, similar kind of a thing is now happening as far as China is concerned. Just in the month of March, when their president had gone to China, agriculture was identified as one of the 4 major priority areas in CPAC, right? Why? Because it was to boost food export to China, right? So the question we can ask is Pakistan capable of feeding its own people? They have just 2 metric tons of buffer stock. And imagine, in case this pandemic lasts, what is going to be there for the food situation. The next point that I wish to highlight is that state has become totally subservient to the clerics. And this was evident in last 2 years. They could not stop the congregation of the people during the holy month of Ramzan, when all the other Muslim countries had closed the mosque and prayers in the mosque so that they could avoid contact. Pakistan, in spite of the efforts of the president, everyone else could not do so. Even the doctors pleaded that, for God's sake, please don't have this, because we will not be able to handle the load. But the government could not succeed. And the clerics, they had their own way. This shows the kind of power they have. This shows the kind of power they wield in having the policies by the state. Although their numbers may not be very high, but they have a huge power with them to influence the policies that the government makes. Now, coming to economy, my question is, can Pakistan revive its economy, right? Because each country is struggling with the strategies to kickstart their economy, because we are in a huge recession, something never ever seen before in the past, right? Now, just to look at some major economic indicators of the past prior to COVID-19, Pakistan had very high inflation, 11%, high fiscal deficit to the tune of 10%, low forex reserves, not more than 12 or 13 billion dollars. And this I'm adding 1.4 billion dollars, which was given by IMF very recently to fight COVID, right? This doesn't cover more than 2.5 months of their imports, right? A very high debt to GDP ratio, almost 90-95%. So that this lowers their credit worthiness. and they have a very high external debt. I'm not talking about the internal debt. Just the external debt is to the tune of about 110, 115 billion dollars, and most of the money they owe it to China, right? The impact of pandemic, obviously, because of the problem in West Asia and everywhere else, the remittances have dropped by almost 25%. They will not be more than $20 billion. And Pakistan was depending on this hugely. Exports would fall, as is the case with all other countries. And they will export garments mainly, 60, 70%, and some agriculture produce, right? Then the inability to service the debt. As it is, they were under a IMF program where IMF had put very severe conditions. These were to increase their revenues, right? Cut down on expenditure, right? Reduce the fiscal deficit and reduce inflation. Now, to fight a recession-like situation, Keynesian theory says that the government must spend and spend and spend, not bother about deficit, not bother about anything else, inflation, nothing. You just spend. Is Pakistan in a situation to follow that, to kickstart the economy? It's very doubtful, right? Now, to this, I will add the defense budget, right? Because they have to show their budget to the IMF before they take the second tranche of $500 million of that $6 billion assistance. Their defense budget is showing a marginal improvement this year, not unlike past year. However, the development budget has gone down by 17.5%. So what does it show? It shows that national security as defined by military remains priority. And therefore, I am quite doubtful whether Pakistan will be able to revive their economy unless they do something different, right? And also, here I would like to add the reliability of China as a strategic partner would be under test because they owe a lot of money to China. Pakistan is unable to pay. They want not a debt to be given later, but a debt write-off. China has never done that, right? So they'll be tested. And it's not Pakistan. China has invested in almost 50, 60 BRI countries. And they are also very, very stressed economically. So if they do for Pakistan, they might have to do for others. Can they do it, right? And what Jal Narayanan said, have they all already fallen into debt trap? Indicators would point that yes, they have, but we may not take that kind of a harsh conclusion as of now, right? Now, what does this do? What is the impact before I come to Afghanistan? They already have 60 million people living below the poverty line. Estimates are that this will rise to about 125 million. More than 60% population below poverty line. Huge numbers, right? Already in Pakistan, we had radicalization. During Zia-ul-Haq's time, the state was merged with the religion, right? And to that, add the nationalism, which is very, very evident whenever they say, we have the nuclear weapon, right? Every time they say, we have the nuclear weapon, this shows their nationalism, right? Now, to this, if we add the social unrests which might take place because of the hunger, increase in poverty, then we have a very difficult situation, internal situation. They might have a very difficult internal security situation, which may then translate into a regional security situation. So not only Pakistan, all of us, their neighbors, ought to worry about situation in Pakistan. And I'm saying this with a lot of positivity, right? Let me now switch to Afghanistan. Very quickly, there are a lot of similarities with Pakistan, but in this case, I would like to begin with some positive developments which have taken place very recently. The first one, of course, is the power sharing agreement, which has been reached between the president and Abdullah Abdullah. Now, all these developments would have a positive impact on the way Afghanistan would be able to tackle their COVID-19 problem. The second is freeing of the prisoners by the president. Almost 1,000 prisoners have been freed very recently. Now, what this would do is, this would pave the way for the talks to take place with Taliban, right? And Taliban may also respond in similar manner because this was to be a swap, right? Then we saw a very positive development recently. There was 3 days of ceasefire. It has happened only, this was the only second time it was happening in past 20, 25 years. This was a very positive development. In case it leads to a prolonged ceasefire, this would help in fighting the COVID, because in Kabul, we have seen a very steep rise in the COVID patient. And as far as Afghanistan, it's not very difficult to imagine that we are not able to capture the right figures, right? We really do not know what is the situation. What I have gathered is that there are 9,000 reported cases and about 187 dead. I do not know whether these are right figures, right? Add to this, they have open borders with Pakistan. A lot of people, Pashtuns, have gone to Afghanistan. Likewise, they have also had been migration with Iran. So, and they are not able to, test these people, control them. So this is going to add to their problems, which they are already having. And just to give some figures, which would put the whole thing in perspective, they had only 2 testing labs in Herat and in Kabul. With the help of WHO, now they have gone up to 19, right? And so far, they have been able to test almost 25,000 people. So far, right? Another very interesting figure is that there are estimates that almost 50% of the Afghan security forces have got infected. Now, what is this doing? It is impacting the training and capacity building which the Americans were doing prior to their de-induction. This is what is impact. This is how the country is getting impacted, right? Of course, poverty would rise. Already 80% people are in that region of below poverty line. It'll become more. There'll be a lot of starvation. So therefore, the countries have to come together. The World Food Program has to kick in. The Red Cross has to kick in. And this is where India can actually come in and provide food. India has already provided medicines and medical teams to Afghanistan to fight this. I think India would do well to provide food so that people do not die of hunger. Economy, I think Narayanan had said, it's only aid dependent economy, and you can imagine what kind of impact it is going to have. The Brussels conference program, by which they were getting aid for past 4 years, is now coming to an end. There was a conference to be held in December. I do not know what's going to happen to that, and probably the aid might continue. But we should not forget that there is aid fatigue amongst the countries. All of them are stressed as far as economy is concerned. How much of aid? I really don't know. Right? Even withdrawal of the US troops would affect their economy, right? So therefore, all indications are that they would be stressed hugely. Now, I have 2 suggestions, right? Firstly, and this is not just fighting COVID, this is also fighting the impact of COVID, which is huge economic problem and poverty and people dying of hunger, starvation, things like that, right? South Asia must trade now. We must trade amongst ourselves, right, to come out of this recession. The sea lanes of communication would be blocked because of whatever. Air communication would not take off in the manner. So amongst us, we must trade. We must begin to trade. We have almost 1.5 billion population. South Asia as a geographical unity entity is almost one entity, right? We have adequate resources. A lot of mineral wealth in Afghanistan has not been tapped, right? Imagine if in case it, and we are reasonably well connected by roads and things like that. It can be better, but we are connected. If India has to give aid to Afghanistan, it should be going through Pakistan. Now for that, what we need to do is put aside our legacy issues for some time. Let's decide for next 5 years, we are putting aside our legacy issues, which we all know. Let's come under the umbrella of SAARC. We have a platform. Let's, Prime Minister Modi did try to restart this to fight the COVID. But unfortunately, because of Pakistan, I think they missed an opportunity. If they had used that, probably even the Indo-Pakistan relations could have gathered some kind of a beginning, right? They could have begun in case that opportunity was taken by them. They frittered away, right? SAFTA is something which we must begin now. We must seriously consider these, right? All this would then create jobs, and what I would say, this opportunity we should not miss at this point in time. Then the next this thing is, before I close, is that we must share and co-develop some good governance tools, right? We face similar kind of problems, we have similar mentalities, we understand each other, so the governance issues are similar. Can we share our good practices? One of the examples is India's direct benefit transfer. We have developed it over time, 5, 6, 7, 8 years. We have got software, we have got that expertise. It is alleviating poverty in our country. Can we share it with other countries? This particular expertise. Likewise, can we share expertise from our neighbors as to how they are tackling some of their problems? So the good governance, because going forward from here, it is good governance and it is the delivery mechanism which would lift us out of this pandemic and also out of the economic recession and poverty. Thank you very much.
Thank you, General Bhadauria. So we now, carrying forward, we now move on to the NICE scholars. And I would like to call upon Dr. Hoimonti Barua, who is the research associate with NICE. She'll be speaking on socio-economic impact of COVID-19 on Bangladesh. Being a resident of Chittagong, I'm sure she will have a first-hand experience and will be able to educate us. Over to you, Hoimonti. You have to unmute yourself.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Chair, for these opening remarks. And as General Sharma has given us a regional perspective, and General Narayanan has given us a perspective on India, and just now Major Bhadauria spoke about Pakistan and Afghanistan. So I will speak about Bangladesh, and it is actually a very timely situation right now, and because Bangladesh at this point is at a critical juncture, because the lockdown that we had, the nationwide lockdown that we had, which we call the general holiday, began from March 26th, and it will be lifted tomorrow after 2 months. And this places us at a very vulnerable situation, even more now than before, because we are at a stage when the backlashes of the lockdown is already being felt and about to be felt more. These ramifications are overpowering and it's here to stay for a while. We know that we are passing through a very extraordinary times. The catastrophic COVID-19 has touched across the globe. It has been 3 months now of the virus in South Asia. And while other nations like US, China, and Europe are beginning to count less of the affected, South Asia seems to be counting more with each passing day. I exactly don't know how the health pandemic will eventually be, but I can definitely say that a socio-economic crisis is going to hit us, and it has already hit us in many ways, and it will be hitting us harder in the days to come. So it will push back thousands of people back to poverty. And to understand the socio-economic impact, I will touch upon 4 points very briefly from Bangladesh point of view. First comes the economic impact. In terms of economy, Bangladesh is badly affected. We know that, like most of the South Asian countries. Most likely, we have entered the global recession. The country was shut down for 2 months, and the shutdown for us is very different from the global North shutdown. The economy was predicted to grow at 8% because we were steadily growing as an economy, and we were about to enter the middle income group. But as per the prediction of IMF and the World Bank, it is rather pessimistic. We are going to be at 2%. The major global economies have been hit very hard, and we began to feel this in early March with the huge withdrawals of investment flows from these developing countries. Our major drivers of economy have either shut down or at the brink of shutting down. With the garment sectors cut close, the remittance earnings are weighed down as our remittance workers, the remittance senders have come back home for an uncertain period of time. On the other hand, we see that a large number of economy is generated from the informal sector. Like 90% of our people are daily wage workers, the laborers, factory workers, and SME owners that are rendered completely jobless. So these people do not have savings. So the idea of stay-at-home policy have hit economies very badly. This brings me to the second impact, that is social. Now, social impact is manifold. It is determined by various factors like the income, the hierarchies of the lifestyles, hierarchy of class, the psychology of people, employment or earning securities, and so on. These factors are so innate to one another that disturbance on one automatically pulls in other aspects. The damage has been felt especially in terms of poverty. In 2019, our poverty rate was 20.5%. Now it is believed to jump back at 41%. So this means that the achievement of poverty that we had in the last 10 years, we will completely lose it and go back to where we were 10 years back. People living in different social hierarchies react differently to various policies and how it affects their life. Like COVID-19 has brought with it a fear of death, fear of stigma, fear of ostracization from the society. Hence, I believe many are also hiding even if they are positive. Additionally, as majority of the population are daily wage earners, as I mentioned earlier, their struggle has been pushed further between a dilemma between hunger versus health, or death from virus versus death from hunger, because work from home is not an option for everyone. But we cannot also overlook the 10 to 20% of the salaried population. They have been affected badly because many are facing salary cuts by 15 to 50%. There is job uncertainty, unpaid leaves, and the recruitment processes have completely stopped. So there is an increasing income insecurity we are already encountering at this point of time. Food security was also felt by the beginning of April, and people began to react to the food shortages. So here, there's a psychosocial crisis that is building up at the community level, at the household levels. Now, thirdly, the healthcare interventions in Bangladesh was very late to reach the community, to reach the people. In Bangladesh, the first confirmed case was on 8th March, but the testing was very low. The probable treatment points, like the hospitals and the testing points, were centralized until recently, along with inadequate resources like insufficient hospitals, insufficient medical personnel, and their motivation to go and work, to be the frontline workers due to the shortage of those resources like PPEs and ventilators and hand sanitizers and stuff like that. And this eventually spread more anxiety, more fear among the people, among the community. So the number of testings have increased now from before. Hence, we are seeing more number of affected people. Like until yesterday, I think the total number of affected were something around 40,321. But the one good side is that the number of deaths is compared to in comparison, it's lesser. It's 559. So
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, sorry. So you see, there is a huge gap here in terms of testing, contact tracing. There's a constraint of resources, etc., and implementing the concept of social distancing and the WHO recommended healthcare practices seems very difficult in the context of Bangladesh. Because I will emphasize here that we all know Bangladesh is an extremely populated country with 165 million people. It's the 7th largest, and our the density is 1,115 people per square kilometers, and especially in Bangladesh, where there's a huge number of urban slums. The huge number of people are living in slums where 10 people or 8 to 10 people are living in one small room. For them, the social distancing, the idea of social distancing or washing their hands continuously, washing their clothes continuously is not a very feasible option, because there are issues of water availability. There are issues of finance, like if they can buy soaps all the time, buy sanitizers all the time. So these factors definitely play a role. And so fourthly is the government initiative. The government has initiated a stimulus package. Every country has come up with stimulus packages. They are different from each other, but they do have. And Bangladesh has allocated a stimulus package, which is I suppose 3.2% of their GDP. But the initiation has been pretty late, and there has been criticism regarding that. The management has been very questionable. It's questionable. It's a problem because it has been accompanied by allegations of corruption, leakages, and favoritism in terms of political parties. So we are looking at a protracted economic crisis and a humanitarian crisis at this point. The fear is far from over for us, for Bangladesh, especially when recently, as one of the speakers has pointed out, how it was difficult for the government of Pakistan to control their people from moving during Eid. Something similar has happened in Bangladesh when 10 lakh people traveled extensively from Dhaka to the other districts to celebrate Eid, and now they are coming back in those huge numbers. So this definitely increases the vulnerability. This definitely increases the potential or probability of increase, which we will see definitely in June. It's inevitable. Hence, June is extremely crucial for us, and possibly Bangladesh might turn out to be an epicenter. So in the coming times, we will see how Bangladesh handles the problem. I think is twofold for me. One is the public health sector, how they are going to control if there is an upsurge, when there is an upsurge, when the numbers rise, how are they going to control that? And secondly, how they will mitigate and manage the economic and the humanitarian crisis that is most likely going to crop up. I will just say that the aim here is not to post-mortem the policies, but to interrogate, like how we are going to how do we look our future as, and how we are going to mitigate this problem, and how we are going to recover in the days to come. So I will end here, but I can pick up during the question and answer session. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Barua, for a nice coverage as far as Bangladesh is concerned. And we continue forward, and the next speaker would be Mr. Sunil Kumar Chaudhary, again research associate with NIICE, and he would be looking at the impact of COVID in Bhutan and Nepal. Over to you, Sunil. Please unmute yourself. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Major General Rajiv Narayanan and USI and NIICE for this opportunity. I will be speaking about the impact of COVID-19 on Nepal and Bhutan. Can you hear me?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So the present COVID-19 pandemic has dwindled the world economy and impacted severely. The world is facing a humanitarian and economic crisis because of the coronavirus pandemic. The world economy is shrinking and the economic crisis is like huge, and almost all the major economy in the world is facing the recession. So in case of Nepal, if we see that till now, the total number of infected people are 1,042, out of which 5 is dead, and total recovery is 187. So total active cases till now is 850. So at this scenario, the outbreak of coronavirus, which has spread like global epidemic and has caused human losses and serious impact on the world economy. From the steps taken to prevent and control this infection, production, supply chain, consumption are disrupted. And according to the International Monetary Fund, it has projected that the global economy will shrink by almost 3% in 2020 due to the slowdown of the economic activity caused by the COVID-19. So its impact on Nepal's economy is getting serious. All the major sectors of Nepal economy are being severely affected. The lockdown caused by the global coronavirus epidemic has brought economic activity to a standstill for more than almost 2 months in Nepal, and it is uncertain that when the situation will be normal. So the longer the situation lasts, the more deadly the effects will become. The risk of negative economic growth has increased as the ongoing lockdown for control prevention COVID-19 continues. So the containment of the virus has led the prolonged lockdown of the country, which is ultimately has increased unemployment in the country as well. Similarly, the daily wage workers who work in the unorganized sector have lost millions of jobs in the country. So relieving and rehabilitating them has become one of the biggest challenges facing the economy. The slowdown in economic activity has led to a decline in sales and imports, which has adversely affected the government revenues. Uh, in the past, like in fiscal year of 2066 and 2077, this is like 2019, 1920, it was the economic growth was pretty good compared to the past years. So Nepal economic growth rate would be much lower than the government had set in the fiscal year, the recent fiscal year, affecting the economy. So despite the acceleration in the overall activities till the end of fiscal year 2019-20, the Central Bureau of Statistics has projected a low economic growth of 2.27% due to the impact of COVID-19. So the current unprecedented situation has affected almost every sector of the economy in Nepal. So this will have a greater, this containment measures taken by the government will have a greater impact on the country's agriculture, industry, transport, tourism, hotels, and restaurants construction, wholesale, retail trade, and other sectors. Uh, Among all, the main economic pillars of the economy, such as tourism, remittance by foreign worker, trades, and business industries, has severely affected. So the four most affected areas are remittance income and the foreign employment, tourism, and small and medium scale enterprises, and the trade, business, and financial sector. So coming over to the remittance and foreign employment, this is a major contributing area, uh, is at serious risk due to the coronavirus infections. In the previous fiscal year, the remittance income of millions of Nepalese workers abroad was 820 billion rupees, Nepalese rupees. That is quarter of the country's gross domestic product, which the country will be losing now. The unemployment of Nepalese living outside the country is in crisis due to the deteriorating economic situation of those countries, those host countries who is accommodating the Nepalese workers. In Nepal, remittance has helped in reduction of poverty, as around 56% of the households receives remittance in Nepal, which is the basic means for the daily consumption and subsistence of their life. So the effect it will have on the coming days seems twofold. On the one hand, the wages of the workers there may go down, and on the other hand, if there is an economic recession on the host countries, employment is may fall in the trap. So basically, most of the Nepalese workers who are working in the Gulf countries are in danger of recession with a sharp fall in demand and prices of petroleum products in those countries. So if those workers becomes unemployed, it will affect the country's foreign exchange reserves. Its all-around impact will be on the economy. According to the World Bank, remittance to Nepal are projected to fall by 14%, and thousands of workers will come back to Nepal, and it will be a huge difficulty for the government to manage and provide jobs and rehabilitate those workers. And in the second is the tourism sector. The world hit area. This is the worst hit areas of the world at present. Tourism and transportation sectors. So basically Nepal announced 2020 as the tourism year with aim to attract 2 million tourists this year, but which is not going to be achieved due to this COVID-19. So tourism sector contributes at least 5 to 7% to Nepal's GDP. Which will be impacted. The tourism sector has been reported to be suffering due to the absence of mostly the tourists from the India, tourists from the China, which is the largest tourists coming from these two countries. It said when foreign tourist comes, in case of Nepal, it is said that when one foreign tourist comes, 9 jobs are created. So we can see that how it will be impacted. On the other hand, the number of people who can go out when their lives and livelihoods are seems to be danger and for a long time. On the other hand, people are not keen to roam at a time when they want to maintain the social distance. So this target of attracting 2 million tourists in Nepal is not going to be achieved, and it will have impact on the GDP of the country. People who used to come here as a tourist are likely to be unemployed in their country. So there's no way they can go other country or come to Nepal and expect to recover the impact on tourism. And this will affect the impact of aviation, hotels and restaurants, transport, and other businesses, and also the bank and financial institutions. The third impact sector will be impacted is like a small and medium scale enterprises. SMEs, the small and medium scale enterprises, are the backbone of the country's economy. Small and medium-sized businesses have been hit the hardest by the lockdown. This sector, which includes domestic cottage industries, small entrepreneurs, small shops, restaurants, small hotels, small businesses, is the largest employer in the Nepal. Uh, this sector includes like everything from a tea shops to restaurant to small businesses and grocery stores. Such a small and medium enterprises have contributed almost 22% of the GDP and provided employment to 1.7 million people. So if this lockdown due to the COVID-19 is going to be continued, this will have severe impact on the economy of the country. So basically, nowadays, no one is in the mood to buy any goods except essential goods. So in particular, tens of thousands of daily wage workers who depend on these sectors will be impacted. And in particular, those who depend on the construction sector are at immediate risk. And manufacturing sector is experiencing a shortage of raw materials because most of the raw materials which are used in the industrial sector, in manufacturing sector in Nepal, are imported from India or China. So, and the wholesale and retail sector has also been affected due to the fall of imports from India and China. So the construction sector, and as well as the construction section will be also impacted. It has impact on the fourth sector, that is trade and financial sector. Most businesses are now at a standstill. In the recent, export accounted for 2.8% and imports for around 40% of the country's GDP. So due to the lockdown, the export has shrunk along with imports. According to the 10-month data released by the custom departments of Nepal, import trade has declined by 13%. And although export has increased by 4.5%, they have declined significantly compared to the previous 2 months. So on the one hand, there is no demand in this situation, and on the other hand, it is not easy to supply even if there is a demand. If there is a problem in the import and transportation of the so-called essential goods. So overall, the condition of banks and financial institutions is also becoming critical. Businesses are being affected as normal economic activity has come to a standstill. All kinds of negative effects in other sectors may put the credit flow of bank and financial institutions at risk. Investments from the public and private sectors is set to decline this year due to the lockdown for the prevention and control of the COVID-19. The government estimated that it will decrease by 3.4% in the current fiscal year. And the bank and financial institutions have invested billions in tourism alone. It now takes time to recover or improve. That is why the assets of bank are at risk with all around impact. So what could be the government response or steps taken to the minimize the impact of this? So Nepal basically is projected to be among the most economically damaging country in the Asia. So therefore, the policy must bring employment-focused programs that can save the lives of citizens in this time of humanitarian crisis, address the minimum livelihood of at-risk citizens, and provide hope in an environment of the widespread despair. So ensuring the provision of essential health and food items, medicines, water, electricity, and communication, to procure such materials keeping in view the capacity of the state and local government, along with the union, and to provide necessary resources for its proper management. Uh, uh, government of Nepal, the finance minister, yesterday has uh, bring forward the budget, and the government has allocated R6 billion in the budget for medicine, equipment, and treatment requirement for the control and prevention of COVID-19 infection. And the government has given up to revive the economy. The government has given up to 75% tax exemption to small and medium scale entrepreneurs. And also arrangement has been made to set up a separate fund to arrest 50 billion for the payment of wages to the workers and employees of small and micro enterprises and tourism businesses which are facing problems due to the coronavirus. So the government has made uh, uh, arrangement to provide loans to 5% interest rate to small and medium enterprises affected by the coronavirus and those affected by the COVID-19. But the big challenge for the government will be how to manage the returning workers, like thousands of returning workers. Okay, uh, thank you. Uh, it is a huge challenge for the government to. So the government, basically, policymakers should have to bring the program to for the rehabilitation and the mechanization of the agriculture sector, which can absorb lots of the workers who are returning from the other countries. So overall, the impact on the Nepalese economy is huge, and the government has somehow able to manage to recover, to control the damage. Now I will move to the impact of COVID-19 on Bhutan. Uh, so at present, like Bhutan is a small country landlocked between China and India, and the number of infection due to the COVID-19 is very low, which is only 31 infected people, and uh, out of which already 6% has recovered. So the total active cases is 25 only. So the Bhutan economy is not that much affected by the COVID-19 because Bhutan's economy is predominantly agriculture, with over 60% of the people on subsistence farming. One of and its GDP size is like almost $2.5 billion. So hydropower, tourism, agriculture is the main largest contributor to the nation's GDP. The World Bank has brought down Bhutan's GDP growth rate projection like to 2.2 to 2.9% from the pre-COVID-19 projection of 6.5. The World Bank has flagged that agricultural, construction, and export sectors are likely to be badly hit owing to the low labor shortages and lower external demand, and this trend is likely to continue till 2021. In case of Bhutan, especially the tourism is the worst hit sector in Bhutan. The livelihood of 50,000 citizens depends on this or allied sector, and with UN World Tourism Organization predicting a plunge of to 30% in international arrivals of the tourists. The World Bank indicated that domestic production of electricity also uh, might decline due to the delays in the completion of hydropower projects, and the disruption in the regular food imports caused by the COVID-19 pandemic has also exposed the country's vulnerability in food security, regarding the continuing lockdown in close friend with neighboring India is a major source of worry for Bhutan. For now, the supply of essential goods through the international border continued. However, reliance on India for several imported goods could become vulnerable if the crisis becomes prolonged. Imports from India amount to 82% of Bhutan's total imports. And also foreign direct investment to the country would be affected. More than 50% of FDI comes from India. So this pandemic, which has the world in its grip, is not just a health crisis. It will have also some extent of impact on the Bhutan's economy and the people. So certain steps has been taken, like the Asian Development Bank has approved a $20 million loan to support Bhutan's efforts to stimulate the economy, protect public health, and mitigate the effects of the novel corona disease. So also the government of Bhutan and the World Bank has signed a fast-track $5 million emergency response and health system preparedness project to help Bhutan's prevent, detect, and respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. So this is the overall scenario or the impact of COVID-19 on Nepal and Bhutan and the steps taken by the governments of the two countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sunil. Thank you for your exposition on the problems being faced by Nepal and Bhutan. I would now call upon the Research Director of NIICE Nepal, Dr. Pramod Jaiswal, the brain behind this conference, the web discussion, to give his thoughts on the impact of COVID on Sri Lanka and the Maldives. Over to Dr. Jaiswal.
Thank you, sir. I'll be very quick as we are running out of time, and we also have one of our scholars from Bhutan, so maybe we'll give him 5 to 7 minutes to give us the ground situation and then open the floor. So for that, I'll be very quick. I'll be talking on impact of COVID-19 on Sri Lanka and Maldives. We all know that Sri Lanka is also not much affected in the region, like Maldives. The total cases of Sri Lanka is 1,530 with 10 deaths, and recovery is almost 50%, which is 745. The first confirmed case was reported in a Chinese tourist on 27th January 2020, and second was after a long gap, which was on 11th March. The first death occurred after 60 days from the first case of COVID. The country imposed lockdown on 20th March 2020. Surprisingly, the government lifted the nationwide curfew in spite of increase in cases, which was around second week of May, and the reason was economy. National Command Operations Center for Prevention of COVID-19 is headed by Army Commander Lieutenant General Savendra Silva, and there are concerns in Sri Lanka at the moment regarding it because he has been alleged of war crimes. So minorities and certain section of people, human rights organizations are raising concern about that. Let me come to economy. The currency depreciation is expected to be 14%, with fiscal deficit close to 10% of the GDP, which is very huge. Overseas Development Institute states that Sri Lanka is most vulnerable middle income countries, so it will be heavily affected. Economy and tourism industry was already suffering due to Easter attack, and it was trying to recover, but then COVID, so there will be another setback on Sri Lankan economy. It estimates that 2.2% economic growth will be seen this year as per the current situation. Sectors that will suffer most will be manufacturing, agriculture, tourism, retail, small and medium scale enterprises. There will be rise in unemployment rate. There will be lack of manpower, and import of raw materials from China is going to hurt the manufacturing sector of Sri Lanka. Let me briefly go to Maldives. Maldives also have around similar number of cases, which is 1,513, and death is only 5, and it has recovered 197 people, which is very low. The country is also in lockdown since 12th of March. The total population is of 500,000, out of which 130,000 are expat laborers in Maldives. We all know that it's a country highly dependent on tourism, where 66% of the GDP comes from tourism sector. 1.7 million tourists visited in 2019, and Maldives were trying to attract around 2 million this year, which was an easy target, but then COVID arrived. United Nations World Tourism Organization predicted 20 to 30% decline in tourism in 2020, but I believe it is going to be much lower because the projection was made a few months ago when the situation was expected to be normalized very soon. We will have, there will be massive unemployment, including the expats, because the tourism industry, which has 66% GDP, is going to be heavily affected. because also like tourism sector is one single largest working force in the country. The biggest market, tourism market, was captured by was Chinese tourists. Biggest market was China, and it is a source of virus. Second was India and Italy, and all these three countries are the major are heavily infected. So the tourism of Maldives will be badly affected this year. There is 90% of the resorts in Maldives are on no pay leave, or a huge cut in salary of their staffs. Country has 20% people below poverty line, and GDP projection for 2020, which was 7.5%, is now going to be 5.2%. The Minister of Finance, Ibrahim Amir, has stated that the country expects a deficit of USD $778 million. So it's a huge package that government has announced for this. Let me see what is the healthcare situation and preparedness in Maldives. Few healthcare facilities are there with limited resources. They have set up National Emergency Operations Center for COVID. There are 46 agencies coordinated by National Task Force under the guidance of Health Protection Agency and National Disaster Management Authority. On February 2020, Intensive Care Treatment Facilities was established at Indira Gandhi Memorial Dharuman Hospital, and they have sea ambulances arranged to deal with this. Maldives National Defense Force and Maldives Police Service are working in coordination with them. They have 300 beds medical facilities prepared at a village in Whu-Oh. IMF also approved almost 30 million to Maldives to address the COVID pandemic. Similarly, World Bank aid package is $7.3 million. Additional $10 million is under the disaster risk management development. ADB has also provided 500,000 USD for the Asia Pacific Disaster Response Fund, which comes to Maldives. Maldives pledges to contribute 200,000 American dollar to the proposed SAARC Emergency Response Fund during the SAARC leaders video conference. There is also support from the region and abroad, for Maldives, India, Sri Lanka, Japan, China, European Union, Bangladesh have extended assistance to Maldives. India provided 6.2 tons of medicine and 5.5 tons of essential medicine as a part of grant. They also provided medical teams and experts. India also assisted the Maldives in evacuating its citizens from Wuhan in China. Sri Lanka is providing cargo service to the Maldives to enable the island nation to continue its trade activities, because it is heavily dependent on India and other countries for the essential goods. Japan also donated 10,000 surgical masks, and Europe has decided to grant $3.28 million, out of which 1.1 million will be extended to the health sector, and rest will be for tourism industry. Bangladesh has dispatched a naval ship to Maldives carrying more than 100 metric tons of food, medicine, and medical equipment as assistance. So I'll end it here, sir, and if there's any question, I'll take it back.
Thank you, Dr. Jaiswal. Before we move on to the questions, we have somebody from Bhutan who's there with us in the meeting. We would like Mr. Chimi Dorji from Bhutan to give us a perspective from Bhutan, if you please. Chimi, floor is yours. Yeah, Mr. Dorji.
Yes, sir. Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Okay, sir. So,
about 5 minutes, if you please.
Okay.
Oh, you muted yourself. Oh, I'll unmute you.
Please. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. So, our former colleague just went through the details of. Colleague from Nepal went through the details of the economy and a lot of figures. I will just be giving a personal perspective of how we are dealing with the COVID-19 situation in Bhutan, and more on a personal aspect. The COVID-19 outbreak in Bhutan's case happened in March 6 through 2 American tourists here, and thereafter the country had to really look at, because initially we were thinking that this is something that's happening in China and Europe, and that's when we actually ended up with the reality check of, okay, it is at your doorstep as well. And so as of now, as mentioned by Sunil ji before, we have 31 cases, but all of them are imported and with no community transmission. So as of now, probably we are one of the few countries in the world where there is no lockdown yet. And but then there are restrictions on large gatherings and closure of commercial establishments by 7 p.m. and so on. And then the cases that we have also seen in the recent weeks are of the people we have evacuated back, Bhutanese who have been living or working abroad, some 5,000 odd numbers. And 5,000 for many of our colleagues here in the room may sound like a very small figure, but in our context, 5,000, it's a big number. And then also, in our case, there is a compulsory quarantine of 21 days as soon as somebody arrives in the country, whether it is by road from India or through flights, the various relief flights that we have been having, a lot of them from the Middle East, and 21 days of mandatory quarantine in which they are provided the facility in hotels by the state, where the meals are paid for by the government of Bhutan, and the hotels are mostly volunteered by hoteliers across the country. And we also have a lot of volunteers now because of the limited medical professionals and other staff. So the government has gone ahead and recruited volunteers to help in this current situation. And we have volunteers manning quarantine facilities and helping police and army personnel. We call them the Tesubs, which is under the patronage of His Majesty King himself, where we have them working as in place of health officials and also in place of law enforcement agencies to ease the pressure on them. As far as the impact on the economy and employment are concerned, again, was as mentioned by our previous speakers, there is a lot of impact, although we would like to believe that a lot of people on paper are engaged in the agriculture sector. But because we are in this unfertile, hilly terrain with rough geographic conditions, agriculture, although it has been traditionally the main industry which has been employing and providing to the country, hasn't been so in the last years, especially in the last 2-3 decades. We have been depending a lot on imported food since it's cheaper to buy from India or from other countries and it's difficult to grow here. So we have to move from this agrarian country to being more dependent on tourism and hydropower and other sectors. So hydropower, fortunately, no impacts. But then again, on the tourism sector, big impacts. And then including the construction sector, because it's a growing economy, we have lots of constructions going on. So issues there. And then also on the other private sector, such as smaller entertainment centers, sports facilities, and then private schools as well. So we do see impacts in the form of job losses, loan repayment by people, and then also food security is also another issue. So as soon as there was this pandemic outbreak in India and India went into lockdown, one of our first concern was not on the economy or other things, was on, okay, where will we get our rice from? How would we bring in our vegetables from? Because we are dependent for a lot of essential things from India. And then so because of this, we do have a very porous and open border in the south with India, as many of you here in the room may know. And so the lockdown in India, in our case, for instance, even though we do not have a lockdown here in Bhutan, it's a double-edged sword, so to speak. It's good in one way, because if there is a lockdown in India, and there's no movement of people from the border into Bhutan, and we have a porous border, and it's not possible to map all the informal routes where people have traditionally been even playing football or grazing cows on either side of the border. So since it's not even demarcated and no fencing or anything like that in the south. But then again, at the same time, we are also dependent on many essential goods and services from India. So it is difficult, including the construction sector. However, fortunately, because of our far-sighted leadership and the support of the government of Bhutan, His Majesty the King, since starting of April, have been providing His Majesty's relief fund and support to everyone who lost job in the country. So everyone who is economically or through employment impacted gets a relief fund, almost like a salary from His Majesty's fund. And then also all the loans have been deferred through the economic incentives that has been provided by His Majesty's office and a group of other professionals who are working under His Majesty's guidance. And then thereon, the impact on common citizens like us, whose businesses and livelihoods are impacted, gets rents, their monthly rental also waived off or discounted and so on. And in the recent months or the weeks rather, I would also like to look at the positive aspects of what is happening in the country in this context of the pandemic. And so like many people of us here in the room, again, we have seen this new culture of working from home. For in our context, this is unheard of, maybe like other South Asian countries, which has its own advantages, both from an environmental and a society perspective as well. There also has been a lot of push now. We have many guides and people working in the tourism sector now doing more cleaning campaigns, improving the trails, doing big plantation drives, beautifying the country more. And then also the agriculture sector, as I was saying, traditionally we have been an agrarian society, but now in the recent few decades, we have been more dependent on India. But then because of the pandemic, we have seen a lot of people going into the agriculture sector. Many fallow farms are now getting plowed, and people we are planting, using them for agriculture now. And then also in the construction sector, in the recent years, we have been highly dependent on imported labor, mostly from India. And now we are also, and then we are now seeing this young guides and drivers and other people working in the tourism sector interested and willing to go back into the construction sector. From a national perspective, we see that this is an advantage, and the necessity is pushing them into do those things. And then also, as far as the international collaboration is concerned, as mentioned by Sunilji, again, we have seen many donor countries supporting us. We appreciate them, including multinational banks. And then also the experiences and works. What I believe is that perhaps, as is also asked by somebody here in a question, in a regional context, we can share experiences of how Bhutan is dealing, or how Nepal is dealing, or how Sri Lanka is dealing. And I believe in the medical community, they are sharing a lot of information. But even in the other aspects, our politicians and decision makers can see what works. Because if one thing works in a certain country, now for instance, what they have done in Taiwan, or if Sri Lanka is doing extremely well, for instance, or if Bhutan is doing, how can we replicate these things and share these experiences, and then also collaborate together? Because sharing of information would also be necessary. One of the things that we have observed is a lot of, now with the easing of restrictions in India, the domestic flights have started. And then also in Bhutan's case, we have now flights coming directly from the Middle East. What if we are able to share prior information about possible positive cases of high-risk areas? Then the impact on the economy, on the health system could perhaps maybe minimized. I think I'll not take too much of time since we are running out of time. Thank you.
Can't hear you. Yeah, you finished?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Dorji. And we have basically 4 sets of questions. I apologize to anybody else who is asking questions, so I'll club them together. One set of questions is basically all dealing with SAARC and cooperation. Should India do more, being the regional power, go beyond the COVID fund? What steps should we take within ourselves in the region to deal with the economic crisis? How can we cooperate regionally to deal with COVID and handle the economic crisis? And if India is, the one question on is to dealing with, if India is moving away from SARC, is it only due to India, Pakistan or somebody else? And the last is that if SARC is not viable, what alternative architectures do we work with? So there is one set of questions dealing with SARC and alternate architectures and looking at that. The next question is the federal system better or autocratic? Because you find in a federal system certain opposition ruled states do not abide by what the center is saying. Or do you find it that the autocratic, the way the Chinese or the Russians are will fare better? Another question is that, like taking on from what I had mentioned, that once the second Cold War is on, which General Sharma had mentioned, and this will be the region where the second Cold War is started. So the external forces are going to create divisions amongst us. So how do we resist it and prioritize our cooperation? And the last is the pandemic due to globalization? So I open it to the speakers, starting with NICE, and then we'll come to the USI. So Dr. Jaiswal, over to you.
Thank you, sir. Maybe I'll try to answer the first two questions, which I think is very important. First, like whether SARC is doing enough or not. I think we could do much more through SARC. Yes, the organization has not picked up much because of the rivalry of India and Pakistan. This is a time where we do not look at politics and other issues. This is a time to act at a humanitarian basis and move forward. So I think all the countries should forget what happened in the past. Maybe this will change Pakistan. So we should take it as an opportunity and then move forward. Yes, apart from SARC, we had BIMSTEC, and all these countries could have done much better, but I think we didn't rise up on time. When Chinese were affected, I think we're not preparing. We're rather wasting time talking about Chinese or criticizing it. And then it's get linked to the second question, that whether authoritarianism is better. We were discussing the same thing when Chinese were doing that. They had very strong control. They had mobilized army, strict curfew, and all kind of systems were there. And many of the countries in West were talking about authoritarianism, human rights crisis, and all. And I think in a crisis like this, it is important to have very strong control, very centralized system. Is better crisis, and that is, I think, many of the democratic countries are mobilizing their armed police forces and military on the ground. And in this situation, we should not look at the system or governance and all those issues. We can keep it aside and move forward to deal with this, because this is if we do not do that, everyone is going to be affected. I think I'll leave other questions to be answered by others.
Sharma, sir.
Just two questions. First is about, is pandemic, the present pandemic due to globalization? I think this is neither the first pandemic in the world, nor will it be the last, right? So there have been bigger pandemics in the world, and despite that, the globalization as a phenomena had taken off, and the effect of this pandemic is not as severe as, say, Spanish flu and Black Death and bubonic plague and many other pandemics. So I think the world will learn lessons out of it. Now that we have a scientific inquiry going on, we'll learn lesson out of it, and we will have certain mitigative measures in place, and globalization will again pick up momentum, because that is how the evolution of societies and the civilization takes place. So it is not a retrograde kind of a step that will actually come out of it. In regard to the effect of this so-called new Cold War on our region, we have to understand one thing, that South Asia as a geopolitical entity is very, very unique. We are actually facing a similar kind of threats. Our interests are very similar. Therefore, there is a need for us to develop a South Asian identity, a South Asian character, and a South Asian consensus. There are differences. No matter what we say, particularly in dealing with the pandemics and humanitarian crisis, unless the whole region is together, no outsider is going to come to us. Even if many countries may bank upon China in a certain way, well, it may be good for trade and other things, or as an act of balancing. But when it comes to humanitarian crisis, we all have to coexist and come to each other's help. And that is what the empirical evidence tells us. Whatever happened in Nepal, the major earthquake, whether there was a water crisis in Maldives, a tsunami in Sri Lanka, or tomorrow if there is a rise of waters, sea waters, and there is an existential threat to some of our neighbors, India will play a major role. So therefore, we should not permit some of these minor irritants in our relations to be blown out of proportion and cast a shadow on the potential of overall relationship. Therefore, there are problems like countries like Pakistan, which are totally on a different trajectory because of terrorism factor. In fact, it dawns upon South Asian nations to collectively I would say, call upon Pakistan to behave like a normal state. And other countries should put their heads and hands and shoulders together to develop some kind of a cooperative mechanism, be it SARC in a modified form, be it BIMSTEC or BBIN or any other dispensation, because that is where our shared future and shared destiny lies. Thank you very much.
Dr. Barua, you have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Much has been covered, but I would still like to just add that for South Asian countries, I believe this is the right time to explore and allow the functioning of our regional cooperation bodies like SARC. And that's why I'm saying we have to allow us to function it the way it is supposed to, because BIMSTEC is there, BBIN is there. But if we do not keep aside certain feelings of animosity, we will not be able to establish the kind of cooperation we are looking for right now. Because as Sir said rightly, that if there is any calamity, if there is any immediate calamities, it is only the closest neighbors that can come together at this point of time. So, and also blaming globalization is not completely feasible at the moment. Globalization has given us the opportunity to rise as nations, to increase our financial capabilities. But definitely, it is time again that we ponder and we look back at the kind of resources we have, the kind of finance we have allocated for medical support, for science and technology and research. If we strengthen that and move along with globalization and the facilities globalization has given us, I think we will be able to overcome any pandemic or any kind of calamities or drawbacks from the nature in the days to come. And we have to do it collectively.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sunil. You got to unmute yourself, Sunil. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah, I would like to add some point here. Uh, at this situation is the global
I would like
pandemic.
you to, if you don't mind, I would like you to address the questions that I've given.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, basically, the situation, yeah, is that maybe the role of shark here, uh, yeah, in the past few years, that the shark is not that much active. That has to be in such a situation like this, uh, due to some reason or some countries, they should keep aside their personal anonymity and come together to solve the and help each other at the situation like this. Uh, somehow SARC is failed to do it. But however, in the recent, I think last month, the initiative taken by India, Prime Minister Narendra Modi, was one step forward to bring together all the SARC countries to solve, address the problem. But however, that the initiative is not implemented. That's just a kind of the attempt, but not actually in the implemented on the ground. So the SARC nation should come together and uh, be together to fight such natural disasters, natural calamities together, and to address the problem of the region. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Could I ask Jill Bhadauria?
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Very short 2 points. Firstly, whether it is democracies and federal governments which have dealt with better or the authoritarian. Let's not forget, how did this whole pandemic start? It started because people in an authoritarian country tried to hide it. And why were they hiding it? Because they were scared of their bosses in the capital, Beijing, right? So they hid it. And anyone who spoke was persecuted. We know the case of that doctor who ultimately died. And so all that information was kept under the wraps. And see, the whole world is suffering because of that. Could the same thing have happened in a country which is democratic? I do not think so. So the answer lies in this particular the manner in which the whole thing started. Right now, as far as the SARC is concerned, I know we have made a lot of attempts in the past. Things have not moved because of a lot of issues between amongst the countries, mainly India and Pakistan. But today we are living in a very different times. We haven't seen this kind of recession. We haven't seen this kind of a situation ever before, at least in our lifetimes. So can we make a beginning? I think we can, right? And then second thing is, when I covered Pakistan, all the indicators to me are pointing that that country is going to go under. It has no capability to revive itself. Economy, I do not think so it is possible. It is totally radicalized. Let's not forget that radical elements have a say in their policies to a great extent. And they are nuclear. They are nuclear powered. Just in case this country goes under, what impact it will have in the region. In case it is not going to impact us hugely, then probably we can continue with what we are doing. But if our assessment is that going forward in a year or two, and in case this country goes under, and it'll have an impact on the security situation, directly impacting us or maybe our neighbors, then we need to do something, right? We need to take that first, not only the first step, even the second step, right? There is a constituency in Pakistan which is wanting peace, right? So let's show this thing. And if the present government and the army cannot, protect their people from pandemic, which I'm quite sure they cannot, right? Then that narrative of theirs would be countered by our positive narrative. So that's why I'm saying let's have a at least make an effort. So these are my 2 points. Thank you.
After I finish, I would request both Dr. Jaiswal and General Sharma to give the closing points of views. I would touch upon these in a little bit slightly different manner. Federal versus autocratic. Why are we comparing US, India and China? Sorry, Japan is not autocratic. South Korea is not autocratic. Singapore is not autocratic. And New Zealand is also not autocratic. They're all democratic and they've done very well. Okay, I will discount Singapore being a city-state. But then Japan is democratic, South Korea is democratic. You have New Zealand also, which is democratic. So we can learn the best practices from them, that how we managed. And rather than politicizing this issue, what I look at both US and within India is we try to politicize it for own local political gains. So we can learn from them. As far as SARC is concerned, we all know that there is a baggage. India is ready to work with Pakistan. I would request the other SARC members to put pressure on Pakistan. He is not going to listen to India, sorry. Even if I give them a positive, he won't listen. Why don't the other members of SARC put pressure on Pakistan? I don't see that coming. Why not? Until that happens, it is not going to change overnight, because the army, the deep state would not like to lose control. So unless a pressure is put and the positivities are given from the others, not from India's side, it will not move on. So we have a BBIN and a BIMSTEC. So let us combine the two. This is the coalition of the willing. Whatever our small teething problems on various areas are there, it is not like what we have with Pakistan. So that can be dealt with. This is what I would say is the coalition of the willing. Add Maldives within this structure and work with that structure. Concurrently, the other SARC members, please put pressure on Pakistan to see light at the end of the day, that this is the way forward, like Dr. Barua had brought out and other speakers had brought out. When you have an emergency, it is the neighbors who are immediately going to come to your help. The others will come. I will just give you an anecdotal thing. I was on the chair which was dealing with all these assistance to HADR. We were having a major conference in our office with the chief sitting there. When we felt this earthquake, I ran to my room. I saw the epicenter was in Nepal. We have a direct line with chief to the army chiefs of both the countries. He was online within 15 minutes. In 3 hours, the first aircraft with assistance had landed in Nepal. Essentially because we are neighbors. We are in it together. Any other country who wants to come in, even if you proceed that fast, it cannot happen because the distance is small. Region as a region, you have to be together. And the last point about pandemic due to globalization, well, everything has its pluses and minuses. As Dr. Barua had also mentioned and other speakers have also mentioned, Dr. General Sharma had also mentioned, globalization comes with its positivity. Your whole economic growth has happened because of the globalization. And General Bhadauria had clearly mentioned how the pandemic spread. I won't elaborate on that. Yes, it comes with its pluses and minuses. And we look at we should look at the globalization in a positive way. And as I had mentioned earlier, my personal view is that you will have a different type of globalization where regional multilateralism will emanate and which will get linked together at the global level. And I missed out Taiwan also in the, when I was talking about, it is also a democratic society. They have also handled very well with the pandemic. So it is not necessary that a federal structure will not function well. It depends on whether the political parties there are ready to work together or politicize. So that would depend from country to country. And autocratic, if we look at Russia, Russia is not, I don't think Russia is handling the pandemic very well. And I don't even think China is handling well, because on last week they had put the, beginning of May, they had put complete Wuhan back again in lockdown, and they had said the 11 million residents have to go through the tests, beginning May. It has not yet finished. Then Jilin, towards the north, about 8 million. put in lockdown again, and they were going to have the complete tests done. Not yet completed. Yet yesterday they are making a statement that we have no cases. I'm sorry, you have not completed your tests in Wuhan and Jilin as yet. The second wave, they keep talking of second wave, that a second wave has come. Then how can you tell me that there are no cases if the second wave has come? So there is a distinct disjointness also which comes in when you have an autocratic government. Unless the autocratic government is a little bit benign. If not, you will have a problem. Look at the problem Russia is facing. It's just shooting up. And Putin can keep saying that it's not a problem. It is a problem. Their, I would say their mortality rates and their is high, and the recovery rates are low. So I will close here, and I would request first Dr. Jaiswal to say a few words.
Thank you, sir. It was really a wonderful session. We learned a lot. I think you raised some of the very important points. The member countries have to pressurize the countries to come for regional cooperation and make it work. I'll end it here.